Ole Miss really seriously needs Georgia to just wreck Tennessee's season this Saturday.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Listen, I know this is the bye week, but Ole Miss can absolutely win this bye week if certain things happen, starting with Georgia bouncing back to beat Tennessee on Saturday night. Today, we're also diving into what is actually a huge resume win for the Ole Miss Rebels. We didn't see this coming. It's the win over the South Carolina Gamecocks. If Ole Miss keeps winning, this could be the standout game that boosts Ole Miss's playoff potential and puts them in the hosting discussion. Ole Miss fans, keep an eye on that South Carolina team and their matchups with Missouri this weekend and Clemson. If the Gamecocks win out, it could position Ole Miss for something pretty special. Remember, South Carolina is just a penalty away from being a serious college football playoff penalty contender as well. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first and listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. Don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy, Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn, Clint Shamblin at Locked On Bulldogs. They offer great perspectives on the SEC and college football, and yes, even Ole Miss as well, so check them out. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. If you want that tickets to the Egg Bowl, this is a good way for you to get it as well. Listen, it's a bye week. It is Wednesday on a bye week, and the college football rankings came out last night. We did a reaction show, a live reaction show to it last night. This was recorded before that show, so we don't actually know what the ranking is at the moment. So that might be why the numbers are a little bit different, but we did react while it was happening live. So nobody missed out on that. We want to talk about the ways that Ole Miss can win the bye week. And Ole Miss can absolutely win the bye week. And it starts with the Georgia Bulldogs. My take on this show is Ole Miss is hosting a playoff game. Ole Miss hosting a playoff game rest on Georgia wrecking Tennessee's season. This is the biggest non-Ole Miss game that you are going to have, Ole Miss fans. You need to root for the Georgia Bulldogs, and we all know what we saw, and we all know how that good that Tennessee defense is, but it is in Athens. Georgia is a little bit of a favorite, but we'll talk about that in just a second. The main keys, the keys to winning the bye week. Ole Miss needs Georgia to wreck the Tennessee season if Ole Miss wants to host. Ole Miss has an underrated resume win versus the South Carolina Gamecocks in Columbia, and Texas is just a single loss away from missing the playoffs entirety. We'll tell you about all of that. But let's start out with that Georgia-Tennessee game, and it was absolutely nuts. I was completely fired up about what I saw. I've talked about how Lane Kiffin grew and leveled up as a football coach from just an offensive genius type play caller into an elite head coach on Saturday. It was a situation where Georgia and Kirby Smart was just waiting for Ole Miss to self-sabotage, waiting for Ole Miss to self-destruct, and Lane Kiffin just would not allow that to happen. Lane Kiffin, even at the end of the game in the fourth quarter, thought about not kicking field goals and just running the ball up the middle and giving the ball back to the Georgia Bulldogs. That was the confidence he had in this game, that he wasn't going to allow a point to the Georgia Bulldogs. So we all know how difficult that was. And there's some edge rushers and all of that coming in with the Tennessee Volunteers to Athens this weekend that could also give that offensive line some trouble. Georgia has to figure out a way to force some turnovers. Georgia has to figure out a way to go defense to offense. If they can do that, they're going to win. If you want to look at the result, it's 7:30 at night on ABC. These are the numbers right now. Like Tennessee is 7. I'm guesstimating Georgia's 11 off of what the AP poll did. We'll see. Like I said, the rankings, the actual playoff rankings, we don't have. Georgia's a 9.5-point favorite. It is a night game. Georgia's favored by more than a touchdown in this game. Georgia was only favored at kickoff by 1.5 points this past Saturday. We all saw how that went. We wondered all week if Vegas knew something, and Vegas absolutely knew something. So we'll see what happens. Can Georgia force the turnovers? Can they play from the lead? Because the secret sauce behind this Kirby Smart team is their front runners. They need all of the good vibes to be coming into the system. If they get up on you by 14 points, it's over because of what the defense can do and how you're forced to play whenever you go down by multiple scores. Nico Iamaleava is somebody that you're going to have to watch. He got injured against Mississippi State. Tennessee's offensive unit didn't look particularly great. They scored some points. Dylan Sampson got banged up, came back into the game. Georgia's defense is going to have to win this football game. If they do that, if they get the offense short fields and stuff like that, Georgia can absolutely win this game. Heck, Georgia's probably the better team. I've heard people talk about how Tennessee was fraudulent. And the reality of it is they haven't played anybody. Only one of the playoff teams in the SEC have played a softer schedule, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, than Tennessee. It's at the point where if Georgia wins this game, the odds are that Tennessee is not going to make the playoffs because of the way their schedule has lined up. It's absolutely bizarre to think about with them being seventh or whatever they are in the country right now to falling completely out of the playoffs, but that absolutely could happen. And they have a game in Nashville against Vanderbilt that could be just put them away out of the playoffs. But at 10-2, I don't think Tennessee at this point makes it in. So a win over Georgia does multiple things. It sets up Georgia to be a playoff team. Ole Miss fans need Georgia to win out. They need South Carolina to win out. If you do that, it's going to help you because they're going to move up the college football playoff rankings, and both of those wins are going to look better and better. Georgia beating Tennessee, knocking Tennessee out of the playoffs, securing a spot for Georgia helps Ole Miss in the tiebreaker scenarios. You've gotten Tennessee out, which you didn't play. You've gotten LSU out, which you didn't play. There's Alabama still sitting in there, but Alabama still has a landmine or two that they have to navigate this season as well. Ole Miss will be sitting about as pretty as anybody for the college football playoff starting this weekend. Like I said, I don't know exactly what the ranking is in this show, but I'm sure that it's somewhere in that 10 to 12 type range. If you just look at the AP poll and what's going on. If that happens, that's exactly where Ole Miss wants to be. And a win by the Georgia Bulldogs over the Tennessee Volunteers takes Ole Miss one step closer to being that second SEC team. The second SEC team in the standings to put them in a host position. It's not going to be in a situation. They're not going to draw up a bracket to where every SEC team goes to every Big Ten team. It's going to be half and half. And you might have an Ole Miss team that is ninth going into the last week to where they would have to travel to, I don't know, Penn State or Indiana or something like that. And you see that gets flipped in that last weekend. Kind of like TCU, what they had done to them after they lost to Baylor. Something happened. They were in the playoff rankings, and all of a sudden they were 5-6, both of them. Neither one of them got to make it in. And we're looking like the ACC and the Big 12 might be one bid leagues. So we'll see exactly how that goes, whether it's BYU or Colorado or SMU or it's not Miami. Miami is the other school. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But Ole Miss needing Georgia to wreck Tennessee's season, and a loss in this game would absolutely wreck Tennessee's season. And I don't think the difference between what Georgia saw last week and what Georgia is going to see this week is the lack of desperation, because I genuinely think that the Tennessee fans and the Tennessee players think they have two losses. But whenever the game control and all of that stuff comes in, you have the win over Alabama, and that's a good win. It's a really good win, honestly, but that's all you have. And when other teams have multiple wins, that gets tricky. And like Georgia would have a victory over Tennessee and a victory over Texas. Ole Miss has South Carolina, who is going to be in the top 25, and Georgia. Alabama has, LSU and Georgia and those big matchups to go into their quiver. And then you've got the Texas Longhorn, which we're going to talk about them in the third segment, because the absolute most hilarious thing could happen in this playoff realm as well. So we'll see exactly how it goes. A surprising resume booster for the Ole Miss Rebels, South Carolina. With huge games against Missouri and Clemson ahead, the Gamecocks could be the key to the Rebels' hosting potential. The Ole Miss fans, you might just want to cheer for the Gamecocks, who, they just have one penalty against LSU. That's all that has kept them out of the playoff discussion hunt as well. Anyway, stick around. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. The Pavilion, Vaught Hemingway Stadium, there's not a bad seat in either one of them, but you can see the views from every seat with Game Time. So you can check it out before you buy the tickets. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets, and with Game Time, and with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with tickets as well. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Have y'all ever heard of the South's favorite pickles? I'm talking about Stuart Cajun dill pickles as well. If you think you don't like pickles, it's probably because you haven't tried these yet. These pickles are so fresh and crunchy with just the right amount of Cajun kick to keep you coming back for more. And they're just delicious. They're also handmade by family-owned company on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, so every bite is packed with that authentic Southern flavor. But Stewart's doesn't stop at just pickles. They've got pickled green beans, okra, carrots, and asparagus too. Perfect for spicing up your snack game. You can find these amazing products at Rouse's, Sullivan's, Corner Market in Hattiesburg, and even some Winn-Dixies along the coast. Or if you prefer shopping online, head to thepickedstore.com. Make sure to give them a like and a follow on Facebook and Instagram. And when you shop local and try these pickles, I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Stewart's Cajun Dill Pickles, the South's favorite pickle. Surprisingly, whenever we were doing W's and L's at the beginning of the season, the games that were going to be big and all that, you're trying to figure out how the season is going to go when we were doing all this back in July. I figured the South Carolina game was going to be tough because of all the Juice Wells stuff that was going on, but I didn't know that it was going to be this important, that South Carolina was going to be this good. I had a discussion over the course of the preseason. Is Shane Beamer on the hot seat? All of that. Shane Bieber's not on the hot seat. So he's done a phenomenal job at South Carolina. And this team is a weird play against Alabama away from beating them, a pick six that got called back away from beating LSU. The only game that they truly lost was against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss absolutely controlled that game. And when we start talking about metrics and hosting and all of that stuff, that is really going to come into play. But this South Carolina game is turning into a huge resume win. If Ole Miss wants to host, it's probably going to be determined on whether or not South Carolina closes the season strong. South Carolina has a game against the Missouri Tigers on Saturday. It is at 3:15 on the SEC network. South Carolina is favored by 12.5 points. It's being played in Columbia, South Carolina version of Columbia, against the Missouri Tigers. Missouri's pretending, I guess, to talk about the playoffs and kind of trying to wish cast their way into the field and get back in the conversation and talk about all of that. And it doesn't feel right. It feels like South Carolina is the better team. When you look at the last 5 games that they've played, they've had a remarkably similar schedule. South Carolina beat Texas A&M. Missouri got blown out by Texas A&M. Now, it might have happened on the road, but they got blown out by Texas A&M. Missouri squeaked by Vanderbilt. South Carolina blew out Vanderbilt. And I will say 21 points is, yes, a blowout, especially with the way the Commodores play. Missouri squeaked by Oklahoma at the end of that wild, crazy game on Saturday. Missouri was able to win. South Carolina blew out Oklahoma. When you look at head-to-head, I don't like playing tragedy property, But if you just look over and over again, it looks pretty good for South Carolina. And now you can see why that betting line is as high as it is. Listen, that was a big game in hindsight. We all thought it was going to be one thing, and it became something completely different. We thought going into the season, especially after South Carolina struggled with Old Dominion, there was going to be a dogfight. South Carolina dominated Kentucky. Ole Miss dominated South Carolina. Kentucky beat Ole Miss. I mean, it's one of those make it make sense. It's the reason the transitive property doesn't necessarily work. I think South Carolina winning against Missouri and winning against Clemson is another key factor for Ole Miss to be in the hosting discussion. In a perfect world, South Carolina, their ceiling is probably about 15th in the college football playoff poll. That is probably their ceiling if they keep on winning. But a number 15 South Carolina and a number 10, number 9 Georgia Bulldogs being resume leading wins at the end of the season, that's nothing to sneeze at. It's actually pretty big time. And everybody's going to say, Steve, why are you talking about all this playoff stuff? We still have to beat the Florida Gators. We still have to beat the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And yeah, that's true. But you can't plan in hindsight. You can't enjoy these bye-week games in hindsight. And it's not our job to not look ahead. It's the team's job. It's the coaching staff's job. It is their job to be completely 100% focused on DJ Lagway, Montrell Johnson, and all of those guys with the Florida Gators in Gainesville. Ole Miss has a chance to do something really special. Every single goal that they had at the beginning of the season, it is so close, so close. You're going to end up being 10-point favorites probably by the time it's all said and done against the Florida Gators. You're going to be probably 25-point favorites against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. It's there. Now, Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, and they were 19-point favorites, so you still have to handle business. But it's all there. Everything's there. Where if Ole Miss just wins 2 games that they are favored, they're going to be favored to win considerably by more than a touchdown, you're in the college football playoffs, more than likely, unless weirdness happens. And it might be a situation that when all the weirdness happens, you move up directly into a hosting position as well. And all of a sudden, Ole Miss is hosting Notre Dame or Indiana or, BYU or somebody like that, SMU coming into town, Miami coming into town, something that will be one of the biggest games in Ole Miss football history. And by the way, if Miami came into town, Ole Miss might be favored in that game by 20 points because of the way they hold on the ball and all of that stuff. That defensive line would absolutely hunt. So pay attention to that and what's going on there. Big game, South Carolina, Missouri. It's a game that if South Carolina wins and if Georgia wins, Ole Miss won the weekend. Ole Miss won the bye week with a Georgia win and a South Carolina win. And it's not because you want Missouri to be out of the discussion. You just want to keep South Carolina in the discussion to where they're popping up on playoff rankings. When you have that top 25 list, people see South Carolina's name, and Ole Miss has 2 college football top 25 playoff victories. That is the reason you're rooting for Missouri. Now, Georgia, you just want them to take care of business to remove Tennessee from the equation. They're just a team in front of you, and you're trying to sweep up the garbage to get it out and clean out that path so you can move a little bit further. We're going to talk in a little bit in the next segment that Texas, they're kind of on thin ice of what's going on. Alabama looks really good, but they got some bear trap type games, and also you should definitely look forward to what's going on with Arkansas because they have a chance to help out Ole Miss just about as much as anyone. So which games could shape the path for Ole Miss heading into the playoff contention? We break down the flaws in Texas and Missouri, how Arkansas could be a surprise ally, and why Texas A&M and Auburn could shake up the SEC playoff race. Do not miss it. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gets you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. This will be a fun week. to sports bet on college football with Ole Miss having a bye week. There's the potential Georgia revenge tour that they're getting ready to take off on the horizon. And Texas is going to Arkansas, and they've basically invented horns down, so that should be pretty fun as well. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check it out, the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more in the same place where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, there's other games that we're going to be looking at and looking down the road of ways that you could be affected. And we're not going to pay attention necessarily to Kentucky or Mississippi State, because even though they might be playing games that could be consequential to you, there's not really a good chance they're going to win those games. I mean, I think State still has Missouri. Something weird could happen, but it's not likely. We're looking at other games, and we're going to start with the Texas Longhorns, okay? Texas is at Arkansas this weekend. Texas 13.5-point favorite. That line opened at like 16.5 points. Is at noon on ABC. Now, Arkansas, we all saw in the game against Ole Miss, them give up 63 points, and it could have been a whole lot worse. Ole Miss broke nearly every record they had in that ball game. I know that Sark saw all of that, and they're going to attack that game similarly, especially when you consider Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. and Steve Sarkisian. They're all kind of from that Norm Chow tree of play calling. So you do need to pay attention to what's going on there. The reason I bring it up, though, Texas is on thin ice. And if you look at Texas's strength of schedule, it's coming in at about 80 out of 130. It is very, very low. The only thing that's saving them at the moment is the fact that they've only lost one game. If they lose a second game and you get that queue built up of two lost teams in the SEC, Texas is likely going to drop completely out of the playoff. And with a game at Arkansas and at Texas A&M, and also that weird one at with Kentucky coming into Darrell K. Royal for a big game, Texas is on a little bit of thin ice. And they need to be careful because a second loss, they don't have the schedule to withstand it. They are definitely in Tennessee's boat right now without the Tennessee-Alabama win. Picture the Tennessee schedule and what they go through without that signature win. It would be a similar situation if Ole Miss beat Kentucky and lost to Georgia. That would be Ole Miss's two-loss resume, to where your losses are the two better teams on your schedule in LSU and Georgia. Texas is going to face something similar to that because, honestly, they haven't played anybody, and it's not their fault. That's the other thing. Nobody knew that Michigan was going to be the level of garbage that they are. Nobody could have saw that. And them being that, and the teams that they've played, like the Mississippi States and stuff like that, Oklahoma being down, it's not their fault that they're down, but they are. So whenever people are looking at a spreadsheet at metrics, who they play and strength of schedule and all of that is going to play a major role in the decision. Texas dropping one out of their last three games, they likely do not make the playoffs after being ranked 6th or something like that in the entire country. That's pretty interesting. Tennessee's in a situation where if they lose to Georgia, they are probably out of the playoff. You have 10-2 SEC teams that are not going to make the playoffs. And if Tennessee and UT or Texas are the two schools that miss it, and the Alabama and the Georgia and the Ole Miss are the schools that make it in, that's interesting. And Texas A&M will jump Texas with a win over Texas. And that's going to be a huge cauldron game. It's going to be very similar to what Georgia ran into at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium in Oxford. Texas A&M is ready for that game. They've been game planning for that game this whole time. It means a ton. So expect them to come out and play with their hair on fire, to come out and play at a level that you just don't know. Now, other games on the schedule. I mentioned Texas A&M. Well, with that game being as big as it is, I think that everybody should pay attention to Auburn over the last 3 games, especially the last 2 where they played Texas A&M at home, where historically Jordan-Hare can be a difficult place to play. We'll see exactly how it goes, and it would not surprise anybody if Auburn popped up and got Alabama, because that just happens from time to time. So that is 2 games that people should pay attention to. I mentioned Arkansas. They also have Missouri. That is another game that they should do. Now, with Drew Prime playing quarterback, I do not necessarily worry too much about that Missouri team going undefeated the rest of the season to begin with, but it just kind of is what it is. At the end of the day, I think probably the best 3 playoff teams, now there might be 4, but the best 3 teams, I think Ole Miss is going to win out. I think that Alabama is likely going to win out, and I think Georgia is likely going to win out, and those are likely going to be the 3 teams that are guaranteed into the playoffs, and the SEC might get a 4th. And that 4th is going to be one of Texas A&M, Texas, and Tennessee. So if you look at 4 SEC teams getting in, those are the 3 that are going to actually be fighting. Like I said, if Ole Miss wins, they just win their games against Florida and Mississippi State there in the playoff. Just winning both of those games has them in a 95% chance of making the playoff, according to the playoff protector. That win over Georgia was not just historic, it was absolutely big in the eyes of the committee and all of the metrics. And if you look at all of the computer metrics, Ole Miss comes in at like 5th in the Sagarin ratings. They're number 1 in game control. All of these weird stats that you hear about, that how ties are broken, Ole Miss is very much up at the top of those rankings. So that is the situation that's going on this weekend. That is how you win the bye week. I think Ole Miss needs Georgia to handle Tennessee. They don't need Georgia to lose back-to-back games. They need Georgia to win that game and then win out. South Carolina is a huge resume game on their schedule. Nobody understood this at the time, but it's turning into a masterpiece. Winning the game against Missouri this weekend in Columbia, South Carolina will be huge, and then beating Clemson at the end of the season will be huge for the Ole Miss Rebels as well. And then we talked about Texas being in thin ice and who they have coming up. Arkansas, how they might rise up and get somebody. Auburn is going to be a big key as well, because they have games against Texas A&M and Alabama. And if Auburn can figure it out a little bit, just figure it out one of those games to where you have one of those special Hugh Freeze games, and they get one of them, that would help out the Ole Miss Rebels as well. Really interesting stuff. This was your what to watch for episode of the bye week, but that is how Ole Miss can win the bye week. And right now it's all about winning the bye week. Go 1-0. And the big key is the Georgia Bulldogs need to beat the Tennessee Volunteers. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves in offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider. It is the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. It is our texting program that sends you notifications on anything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial. Experience the future of college sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so don't miss out. The link is down in the description. For those of you on YouTube, we will send you all to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.